Hey, everybody, welcome back to the latest episode of AI Unleashed. And today I have the pleasure of talking to a fellow PhD holder in the realm of technology enhanced learning. And yeah, so join me and in your applause in the comments to welcome Dr. David Love. David, welcome.
Hello
Thank
there.
you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
Good, good, good. Let's kick off with, of course, telling everybody a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm a L&D specialist, a learning design specialist. I've worked across all different organizations, different projects, worked everything from a sort of instructional designer to managing teams to running a company, running lots of teams here and abroad. My background is teaching, a master's degree in e-learning, specializing in e-learning in education. And my PhD was technology enhanced learning. So yeah, and that's more or less about me. So I've been doing it for a good number of years now, about 30 years in all. So I've been around the block, but yeah, delighted to be here. I've written a book called Time for Trust, and I have a Substack called Time for Trust too, Dr. David Love, Time for Trust. So people can feel free to look me up there.
Very good. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll put all of the links in the comments so you can contact David if you wish. So let's kick off with the book, with the model, with the time model, and let's talk a little bit about that, because I think one of my reflections from a practitioner side in the broad realms of industry that I've worked in is that practitioners tend to be, I wouldn't say disparaging is probably the wrong word, but they tend to be a little bit blasé about the power of the literature and things like frameworks and models that come from the literature and how they can be applied in practice. So it's good to kind of make that connection when we have evidence-based modeling and we have the practitioner side, which could really use some of that stuff to maybe not reinvent the wheel every time. So let's have a chat about that. Describe the time model and let's talk about it.
Absolutely. So the time model came from my PhD research, actually. It stands for Trust Integrated Model for Educators. Now, educators is an umbrella term for anybody in learning that works in digital learning in any part of the project. They're involved in an actual project where they're doing online learning, technology enhanced learning, anything that's working within a project where you have subject matter experts, the whole team working on something to deliver. So the research itself stems from my experience over the years, where there are many, many issues that occur between learning designers, or you might call them instructional designers. Obviously, there's a lot of issues around naming conventions. Are we an instructional designer? Are we a learning designer? Are we a learning experience designer? All of these different titles mean one thing to one person, mean something else to another person. The intention is there, but is it necessarily correct? I tend to lean more in towards learning because it's an umbrella term and there's different things. I mean, learning experience, I'm not sure if my design of a learning experience is going to be relevant to an individual once they take the course. I have no idea until they've actually taken the course. So there's all these different terms, and that also affects how learning designers are essentially recruited and held, because retained in their work, because the terminology of what these people are and what they're expected to do has grown exponentially over the years. Traditionally an instructional designer or learning designer would be focusing on the pedagogical ways to deliver learning for learners to, be engaged, to deliver certain outcomes and objectives and so on and so forth. It used to be that you'd have a learning developer. It would be a separate thing. Obviously, it's merged over the years, lots of tools. There's something where people are just so invested in their time to be able to upskill. It's an upskill fatigue, I've called it, where instructional design is never quite there. They have to keep learning a new tool because a new project will come along, a new requirement, and so on and so forth. There's all these different things that are involved. And then they work with subject matter experts who themselves have their own expertise. They may feel that in different environments that an instructional designer or learning designer comes in, and they may not be so open to being told that actually this isn't a great idea, we need to include this, drop this, and these are the reasons why. There's lots of different things that do occur, and I've seen it over the years. I've experienced it myself. The issue, though, is not so much that it's a problem for the instructional designer or the learning designer and that subject matter experts are the issue. Is that there is an ongoing issue across the board. So no one is to blame, actually. There's a lot of misinformation, miscommunication, assumptions. In education, a lot of times subject matter experts are assumed and also assume that they are to develop and design their own material and only seek support from a learning design team if and when they need it to help them upload to a VLE or that kind of thing, or supply some PowerPoints or supply some video. There's a lot of assumptions and miscommunications in that sense. In the corporate world, subject matter experts can be, I mean, obviously in both environments, but, just in this example, can be super busy on what they're doing, doing lots of different projects. Maybe being a subject matter expert isn't something that's rewarding enough for them, or being rewarded or validated. They're having to do something else extra to their workload. So there's all sorts of things that are going on. So there's a disparity of it often doesn't work. And anything from, the objectives, the overview of the course doesn't come through, and the evaluation doesn't work, and so on and so forth. So along with that is the leadership and the faculty in education leadership in all of the organizations about whether or not there's support for these two parties to come together and to form trust. Because trust at the end of the day, through my research, has come out as one of the key factors. I, in fact, called trust really the currency of our time. I think it's something that everybody's fighting for because it's being eroded as we speak. I think that trust is something that is disappearing very fast through governments. We're seeing it through social media, through AI. Is it real? Is it fake? Deep fake? All these different things. So societally and within these projects, trust is something that is important. So the trust integration model for educators' time is something that, as I say, came out of the PhD research and helps practitioners, learning practitioners across all of the different areas to work together and to build and maintain trusting relationships. So that's the purpose of it. Long-winded way of saying it, but essentially there's a lot to say about it because it's not sort of, starts here and ends there. It's quite a nuanced thing. And the book itself is a practitioner book. It's designed to help these practitioners to pick it up and whether they're in leadership, whether a subject matter expert, whether a learning designer, to think about things to help them achieve their objectives and aims.
So let's unpick some of that. So there's a lot in that, what you just said. And if I start on the basis that there's a little bit of course, I've encountered many of these things in my working life as well. There's a little bit of, in the learning profession, and I'm going to use the term learning, even though I'm about to pivot and disparage that term hugely. But in the learning profession, there's a lot of this kind of order taker versus value creator balance. And in the order taker space, because let's face it, most of the industry is an order taker to the business, and the departments tend to find it very difficult to break that mold. In that space, we have concepts like learning and concepts like training. And you've used the term learning to mean really not what I would call learning, which across the industry, we will say people who are learning designers can design learning. They can't, right? Learning is if you think about the educational literature, learning is a process that happens in the brain, creating meaning, comparing with mental models, and then producing some kind of delta. What are people actually designing? What are they developing? What is instruction? These kinds of things to me are just throwaway terms that are poorly understood by practitioners across the entirety of the industry. And people will use these terms to basically signal their ignorance of the literature. And I've had stand-up conversations with people who have basically no education at all in this space, who will stand up and say, training, learning, it's all the same stuff. Why are we even bothering? Contrast that with corporate learning. So where we have a department that is the custodian of media and a platform upon which media sits. Nothing to do with cognition, right? Nothing to do with really behavioral change. So we're talking about media creation in that space. And all of these terms, to me, in the practitioner space are so fluid that they eventually become meaningless when we're trying to talk about cognitive, motivational, or behavioral outcomes that result from a particular design in terms of media. So how do we reconcile those things, as well as things that are difficult, like you mentioned trust, like what's the definition of trust in a learning context? Probably on a practitioner level, it's not something that's commonly understood. So how do we reconcile these things, which are effectively terminology, definitions, basic understanding, basic education for the industry, but they do have an implication when it comes to what are we actually trying to achieve?
Yeah. So a lot of these, so for me, I mean, there is no one answer, but for me, one of the key things is that I want to empower people who work in learning. So so there is a difference, obviously. Learning and training are two different things, and learning, how do you define it? Evaluation is one of the key things, obviously, trying to work out what people have experienced, how it's changed for example, their awareness or their ability to perform something and be able to measure that. Training is an event, learning is an ongoing process. So there is these different sort of frameworks and models and things that we can look at. But in terms of the understanding it and using it, utilizing it every day and being understood across the industry, these terminologies, I think the voices of learning designers, okay, so we're just going to call them that. As I say, I mean, they could be called anything. There's all these different terms, I mean, I got a role many years ago as a learning technologist. I don't know if you know what that is, but a learning technologist is a very specific thing in a higher education, and it turned out to be instructional design and development. It wasn't a learning technologist at all. The root of a lot of these issues comes from hirers, people who are hiring people to do a task that they don't really understand what the issue is. They know there's an issue, and they don't really know how to solve it, but they've got a few buzzwords often. They've got an idea that this multimedia thing will be able to solve that, and all we need is someone in to come and just do it. From something I did years ago, I was asked to perform a miracle with the Evolve tool and perform transformational awareness across a very large organization. And I said, well, this is impossible because you're relying solely on this tool to be able to achieve all those different things. There's no thinking about the learning design part of it, what are the true impact of the learning. It was just filling in lots of space within Flipkart. So the people that are hiring, the leaders, are often not aware. They're not clued in. They're doing different things because their role requires them to do that. They have their own pressures, and they're not learning professionals. Okay. Again, I'm using the word learning, but obviously it's an umbrella term.
Yeah, sure.
But I do think it's important that the learning designer, instructional designer, whatever you call that individual, has self-trust, self-belief, self-confidence, and awareness of all the different nuances and aspects of what goes into designing a learning experience or a learning object or all these different things, and thinking about the individuals that are experiencing this and what the output will be and what it means for when they've done that, and then following it up afterwards. So yeah, there's a lot to it. And in terms of trust, it's the self-trust, and working with subject matter experts. You've got things like relational expertise and intersubjective trust, where you're, working with individuals. And this is where often goes wrong with the subject matter experts and the designer, that people don't really understand what their roles are. They don't understand what their skills are, what they bring to the table. And what often gets involved then, I'm talking about leaders making decisions and then feeding it down to, say, recruiters. It's a big issue for me, recruiters, because they often hire people and they put out these job adverts and really nobody seems to understand what it is. And then when you go and do the job, it isn't actually that anyway. So it's very confusing. But yeah, so where was I? So the leadership needs to be involved in that, because a lot of leaders are not clued up on this stuff. They're just leading, but are they aware? So they might do a refresher course, they might do a VILT, and somebody introduces them to the concept of whatever X, Y, and Z is. But do they understand learning? Do they understand the process that is involved? So yeah, there is no one thing, but there's lots of aspects to it. So it's a bit like a spider's web, and which is where the time model comes in. Yeah. So help me out here. So have I answered your question in a roundabout way?
Let me respond to a couple of these things. So
Okay.
for me, it seems to be relatively easy to define, right? I don't necessarily agree that it's difficult to define, because I'll talk through a couple of things. So I wrote a paper last year on basically where pedagogic choice comes from in the industry. And it comes basically from three different areas. So area one is tool-driven pedagogic choice. So if somebody has an avatar tool, they need to get use out of it because the organization has paid for it. So everything becomes a talking head video, and the choice is made by the tools that you've purchased. And the second is, of course, stakeholder-driven choice. Stakeholder says, here's my PowerPoint. It needs to be an e-learning course. Does it?
Yeah.
Really? But the stakeholder will say it. And noisy stakeholders that hold power over learning departments who are meant to serve, the dynamic is going to be clear and the choice is going to be made. And the third is the utopia which you're describing, where a learning intervention, and I'm using the term intervention deliberately, is, somehow created and implemented with the learning outcomes in mind. And that's where a good designer will get involved and they will do the things that they're meant to do. And I think those three things are very different things, but also they're very different not only in their nature, but also in their prevalence, because most of the industry that I've worked with will make tool-driven choices. If they have the capability to do that, but their tool choice itself is dictated by stakeholder opinion. So we have a mix of the first two things where stakeholder opinion is, and learning departments are notorious for this because this is how they work. I see a shiny thing, I show it to a few people, I convince my leadership to release the budget. Now everything needs to go through that tool, and stakeholders will come to me and say, I saw that shiny thing, I want it. So you get a mixture of tool-driven and stakeholder-driven pedagogy, none of which is ideal from a learning perspective, of course. So you get those things, and I use the term learning intervention deliberately because it should be an intervention that produces a difference. And the concept that it's difficult to define learning, of course, if you think about the model that I've mentioned, where person takes a stimulus, that stimulus is an information stimulus. That information stimulus reveals some kind of learning process within the mind of the learner, etc., all the things that I said earlier. That's played out in the educational literature quite a lot. There's a lot of research around that. So what that boils down to is we're making, in the corporate learning space and all of the agencies and everything that work in that space, what we're doing is we're trying to create a media-based stimulus.
Yes.
That media-based stimulus is the foundation for an intervention, and that intervention should produce a cognitive difference. That's basically what the whole thing does, and not to boil it all down to a sentence, but that's what the entire learning industry should be doing. And if that's the case, then what we're looking at from the design perspective, you mentioned, or we talked about instructional designers or trainers or whatever, we're talking about media designers, media developers. And the purpose of the media, of course, is learning, behavioral change, whatever, those things are. But that means it's kind of easy to define what the roles are. And yet somehow we're in this mess where we say the entire industry just doesn't get this. How can the industry not get it if this is what they do for a living?
You see, I don't agree that it's just media, it's modalities. Do a blend, then, it can be some video, it can be, face-to-face, it can be a virtual instructor-led training, it can be all those different aspects. But I think the learning designer will have the awareness of what is relevant for the content, working with the stakeholders. As you say, people buy these products and then they're reliant on it to solve. My Evolve example, as I just mentioned earlier, they're wed to this tool, it's got to solve it. How is it going to solve it? That might be appropriate for certain aspects of the course or certain aspects of the learning intervention or set of interventions, or for a micro learning in the flow of work thing. But, it's got to take somebody with the awareness and understanding of is it going to make an impact on the awareness or the different, of these individuals, and then use the relevant tool. And which is where AI can come in now, because sort of Socratic learning, agents and sort of discussions around things, which is really, really useful. Some of the things we've been looking at, and the hyper-personalization, relevant to the individual, relevant to their role specifically, all that kind of stuff.
Can you hyper-personalize, really?
Well, this is the aim, isn't it? This is the dream. But, people are saying that they're doing it. So, I'm definitely open to the idea of it. But you can definitely personalize. And it's something my team are looking into. And in terms of tools as well, I would add that, and something as in the last month, but definitely the last week has really come up, is how amazing. See, we hear about AI all the time and the benefits and all this stuff, but the dangers and the benefits and all this stuff. I mean, I'll go into things like cognitive debt and all of that in a minute. But what you can do with it is, I've seen novices, essentially non-coders, use the bare bones of Copilot to create things that actually I would have paid £400 for a subscription for. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So there is a lot of potential. And, when checked with other coders who they've said, what do you think of this? Could you look at the back, the innards of it and see what you would say and how you would change it? They've given them 5 stars. So that's something as a paradigm shift, definitely for learning design in general, I think. And also it's going to be a wake-up call to some of the e-learning companies out there, the SCORM the SCORM producers, shall we say, because there's going to be this
Yeah.
move away from the LMS and SCORM and all of that. I've seen it very clearly. This is the way we're heading, and this is what we're looking at in my team. But
If I could
I agree.
challenge that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
So assuming a paradigm of static content in a SCORM wrapper, that's an assumption. Then yes, we can make a SCORM package now. I've got a product that does this as well. We can make a SCORM package now in less than 30 minutes. So all singing, all dancing, cinematics, talking heads, whatever you want, right? 30 minutes and we're done. And the entire agency model is predicated on clients not knowing this. And especially offshore agency is predicated on, let's throw cheap labor at this stuff so that you don't have to do it. And the cost base is slightly different, but you could drop that cost base by another 90% and just do it in half an hour. The days of taking 12 weeks to make an e-learning course should be behind us. But back to the assumption. The assumption is we're going to make static content. Now, in this world where we talk about hyper-personalized learning, which again, I don't think is a thing. And the reason I don't think it's a thing is that learning departments generally don't have enough data to personalize on. So if all we're really talking about is whatever you've said in the chat, that's what we know about you, which to some degree, that's neither personalization nor hyper-personalization. That's just customizing based on the thing you just said, particularly in the Copilot space where you don't have persistent memory across chats, which you generally don't. So it's almost impossible to do this thing that the entire learning industry is saying they're doing. If people are doing this, they need significant data collection structures to be able to personalize. So we've got the SCORM paradigm thing. If we're making static content, yes, you can do it in 30 minutes, and it's amazing. You have the static content piece itself. So if we're now going to say, well, what we're going to do is we're still going to make static content, but it's not going to be a SCORM package. We can make a game. We can make, a bunch of other things. We can code it, and the capability is there, and that's good. But it ignores one thing, and that thing is that if everybody has these tools, why would you need a learning department to code something for you So if I'm working at a terminal, I'm working at an agent interface, I'm using Claude, Gemini, whatever it is. I won't talk about Copilot because, frankly, Copilot's not in the game anymore. But if we're using one of these structures, and I'm going to learn back and forth, I need to know this thing. Where is that information? I'm going to get that thing. Talk me through how to do it. Give me step by step. Help me with the code base. I'll make the thing that is useful for my work. Why do I need a learning department who doesn't know what I'm doing, who needs me to tell them what they're doing so they can code a game that will show me the thing that I'm doing? That circularity in that step is effectively a waste of time. Now, I'm being deliberately provocative and trying to put something on the table for us to discuss. But it seems that there's not really a space for learning departments, learning designers to learn how to code with these agents so they can produce artifacts that show somebody else how to do something who also has access to the same agents. So how does that work?
So this is where the expert is needed because, as you know, it's notoriously AIs, certainly as we understand it, LLMs are notoriously hallucinatory and make assumptions based on data they're given or based on the scraping of data and looking at data that they've scraped from the internet or within your department or whatever it is. I think so within learning, just really strongly believe that, and from experience, that the learning design professional is more about scrutiny now. Scrutinizing what is the output, making sure it's validated, adding and taking away all the different aspects of it. I don't believe, and this is where the cognitive debt comes in, that people are just handing over information to something that they're just believing that it's going to happen. The Deloitte case, for example, all of those different things where they got sued because they just did a chat GPT thing and just, sold it. This is not something people can rely on anymore. This is back to trust again. People just don't believe stuff. It's pervasive. We can see we don't believe it. And so I think I've seen over the last year or two, people saying, the learning designer industry, the learning designer profession is on the decline because AI will be able to do X, Y, and Z. No, I don't believe it now. I think we're at pivotal point where the learning design profession is actually needed more because it augments what they do. And you need the expertise to be able to scrutinize and validate all these different things. Therefore, those individuals are required. And I think that for coding as well, it also happens where you've got code, it does stuff, but is the code always correct? So from what I've heard from my team, they went to coders and they could see that there were these discrepancies. Also, the tokens run out, you're designing stuff, and within one chat or one agentic interaction, it runs out of steam and then it starts giving you mistakes. So this is what I see. And I think that this is why you do need departments, not necessarily departments, but you certainly need expertise. And the expert in the room, the human in the loop is actually needed more than ever.
Let me throw another 2 logs on the bonfire, right?
Carry on.
Got to keep challenging this stuff.
That's all right.
So the first thing is,
yeah,
we're talking about learning designers as if it's a monolith. There's a distribution of capability.
Sure.
And people are going to be more or less capable. You'll have top performers, you'll have poor performers, you'll have a mean, you'll have standard deviations from the mean. To say blanketly, and I challenge this every time I hear it, every conference, people who are watching, you keep saying this, and I keep poking you like I know I do. The statement that AI is not as capable as a X, doesn't matter what X is, let's, for the purposes of this discussion, learning designer, ignores distribution of capability. So model capability will be greater than the mean in many cases, depending on what we're talking about. The capability of structure, guidelines, plugins, skills, knowledge base, vector data that helps to guard against hallucination. And of course, if we're using this stuff in workflows, we're also talking about model parameters, sampling temperature, and things like that to make things more deterministic and less probabilistic. So we have all of these things in the AI space, plus the concept of capability distribution in the population, which makes me challenge this statement that AI is not as capable as giving expertise as the practitioner, because the practitioner's capability is distributed, and we've ignored all this other stuff. If you're just going to use Copilot out of the box, of course, you get what you get. But if you use a highly guarded and highly trained system with a detailed knowledge base, with strict guidelines, with skills, with all of this other stuff, then you're going to get a very different level of output. And I know most of the industry isn't there yet, and most people are just using things out of the box. And if you're using things out of the box and you're trusting what it says, that's on you. Go and get better at what you do. If you're watching this, get better at what you do. But all of those things that I've said mean that the statement that AI isn't as capable as a practitioner is probably up for challenge. What do you think?
Yeah, no. So I don't think it's not capable and not capable as a practitioner, but I think you need the practitioner to be able to identify where it's not capable. Okay. So it's capable of all sorts of things. It's absolutely undoubted. But I see that when you work with it and augment to the individual's work, it works better. As you say, out of the box, if you've just, shouted out to people, if you're doing that, then it's on you. But people are doing that. This is the issue. So you need somebody in the room. It's on them. But, this is the thing. People are doing it. They're expecting things. And I've seen this in the learning space where people are still doing that. So they're doing some Copilot training to get up to speed and, and they're experimenting with it, but it's still more or less out of the box. And the prompting and prompt engineering, all that stuff, it relies on somebody with expertise to scrutinize it, to recognize. And this is one of the big things. AI definitely misses nuance and misses empathy and misses the humanistic qualities that it will take you literally for what you've said. So you might say something and imply something. It's implicit in what you've said. Doesn't understand that until you tell it that I said this implicitly. What I meant was specifically this, and you've et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think it misses on that. I absolutely think that AI is capable of so many things. We're using it all the time and it works very well, absolutely. But when it comes to, certainly within this space, I really do see strongly that you need that individual with the expertise. And we'll see in other areas as well, somebody with expertise to look at it and validate what the outputs are. I think that AI will get better. Absolutely. It's growing all the time. But I think it really misses on that stuff. But, I've just thrown this into the mix about in medicine, there was an interview quite recently where a medical professional was talking about hallucinations in the medical industry. And in that sphere, hallucinations are almost welcomed because they're seen as ideas, something that is out of the box and something to look at and pursue. Whereas in our sphere, it's more or less, well, what are they doing? They've given us a citation that's completely fictitious. They made up something. it may be plausible, but it's not accurate. It does take somebody with the nous to spot this and to challenge it. But again, that hallucinatory effect in a different sphere is actually quite useful. So it's all swings and roundabouts. But I do believe the expert in the room is still needed in both spheres.
Okay, but yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you, but the expert in the room is not a learning designer. The expert in the room is the subject matter expert who's looking at the citations, figuring out if they're accurate. It's the domain expert and not the learning expert. What does the learning expert bring to the table that a subject matter expert or a domain expert armed with the same tools and, Claude design or something, rather than I'm deliberately not talking about e-learning tools because they are no longer required. If you're out there and you're paying for this stuff, stop doing that. Go and use proper tools like a grown-up. And all of those tools that we have available to us, if we have a subject matter expert who has those tools available to them and they have a knowledge base and they have skills and they have MCPs and they have APIs and they can use some of this stuff, what is the learning professional actually bringing to the table? Because they're not looking at citations. I think that's a fallacious thing to use as an example. What are they actually doing?
So to answer those two things, so in their own output, so they're designing interventions through bring up something that relates to this material from the subject matter expert or create an. So for example, you know as well as I do that you may have an indication of what a project may be about. You have a kickoff meeting, subject matter expert may only give you a little bit of information, may not have even turned up, may have missed the call. There's all these different things. So at least you can start off with something that generates that conversation further. So those sorts of things. So that that's one thing. But what the learning designer or the learning professional brings to that whole thing, if a subject matter expert has produced that material, is to recognize and understand how to make it work in the online medium, in the classroom, in the training room, in the virtual instructor-led training sphere, as a micro-learning, intervention, all these different aspects, all the different modalities that may be appropriate to that material, but also identify what is a need to know, what is a nice to know, what can be signposted out, all of these different things that subject matter experts. I've never met a subject matter expert yet who will be able to identify that. Now, of course, there are educational professionals who are subject matter experts, higher education and that kind of thing, who will have an idea of how to do things based on their understanding of their technology enhanced learning sphere. Okay. And will work with instructional designers and learning technologists to be able to achieve that. But in essence, certainly within my experience, it definitely takes that learning professional to be able to identify that and then explain why that material is relevant, isn't relevant, what can be signposted out, what can be condensed, what would make it more engaging, all of these different aspects that a subject matter expert usually doesn't.
Sure. And the reason I'm pushing so hard on this is I don't run a training company. I'm not a learning designer. I run a tech company.
Yeah.
For me, many of these discussions that I have in the learning industry where people say, we need this, we need this, we need this, etc. To me, arise from a poor use of tech and not from a real understanding of what people need to do and what tech can do. Because everything we've just discussed, to me, is a set of rules. If it's a set of rules where you're weighing pros and cons and you're making different decisions, it's an algorithm. If it's an algorithm, a machine can do it. And if a machine can do it, then to some degree, you're going to get less fallibility. So if we were to, and I'm just going to spin this out as a hypothetical example, but if we were to say, right, we've got a handful of key papers, a handful of meta-analyses, we know where the evidence is around experiential simulation-based gamified learning, we know what different types of inquiry-based learning or problem-based learning look like, we know where the efficacy is, we know what the modalities should look like, we know what the media can do and how it can be designed. We're going to put all of that into training a model, and that model is going to be an expert in instructional designer or learning designer, whatever term we're using these days. And that is going to look at the intake payload of the data, whatever that is, a request, let's call it a request. Going to look at that, suggest a bunch of things, blend modalities, media, whatever it is, and it's going to package that up as an experience. And we're going to have a quality checker agent that's going to basically go and do the same job. So now we have adversarial training. And we look at these things and we say, well, there's the output. We know it's basically far superior than a human designer, an average human designer, not top performers, right? We know that it's capable of doing that at a level that's way above the mean in the industry. Everything I've just said is mostly not what you're talking about, because what you're talking about is the learning designers en masse in the industry using out-of-the-box tools and then saying that's only 30% of the way there. What I need to do is I need to check it because I'm a human. I'm more than 30% of the way there. Great. So if we actually use the tech in the way that the tech should be used, which most of the learning industry doesn't, then the argument to me goes away because we've established that nearly everything we do in the learning space, we have ADDIE, we have learning design, we have learning design, frankly, that's not based on the literature, just based on, finger in the air, look and feel. I think it should be a blend. Let's get everybody in the classroom. They all love the sandwiches. That kind of thing is done in a much more accurate way by a properly configured machine. That's my challenge. That I don't believe that practitioners in the industry have a long shelf life if they're going to continue doing the thing they're doing.
Yeah. Well, I don't disagree with that. I think that, there is truth to a lot of what you just said, but I'd still think from what I've seen so far, what the evidence shows me, that you still need the expert, even if you see the subject matter expert. So if I, were meeting you as a subject matter expert and produce something through AI and gave it to you, you'd need to check it, okay? Because you're the expert in your field. And likewise. So, there's nothing wrong with relying on tech and all that stuff. All good. And using it as part of your toolbox. But I've heard this before where all of the tools and all of the tech will solve everything and you don't need this. And I've heard it for years. This is dead. That's, forget this, forget, as Flash, as I did say before, Flash, is one of those things that, we were told is the thing, and JavaScript, you need to do this. It's true. It did last for a while, but it didn't solve everything, and it did what it did, and it disappeared and all that stuff. And then instructional design is dead, and, AI is here, and watch out for your jobs and all of that. And I did see a decline in the basically employing people in the learning field, and I'd see it on the turn again because people are realizing, oh, actually, no, it doesn't solve everything. And we still need the expert in the room to be able to check it. Yes, it will automate things faster. Yes, it will do that. It will, as I said to you at the beginning, the team I've been working with, they're novices in terms of coding. They are complete novices, and they've used bare bones Copilot. They haven't even got the agentic thing installed yet, right? And they're producing stuff. It's incredible. They needed an expert to check it and to make sure it was, validate it. They gave them 5 stars. Yes, amazing what you've done. It did what you did, but can you rely on it? Can you rely on something that is technological only to help that aircraft get off the ground and only rely on that? Is that it? There are no experts left. Are they not going to look at it? I'm very much in terms of technology. We need it. It works. All those different things. But you need the expert. I'm
not disagreeing with you. We do need the expert. The only point I'm disagreeing on you with is that we do need expert review for the things that are produced. That expert is never going to be the learning designer. It's always going to be the domain expert. So in your example, learning designers did some coding. They needed a coder to review it, right? It wasn't learning designers being the expert. It was the coder. So if I was to produce something on pharmacokinetics, right, as a learning designer, you're going to produce it and it's going to be great. And then you're going to need somebody who does pharmacokinetics to review this, whether or not it's accurate. Same in the clinical space, same in farming, same in agriculture, same in engineering, right? We've got this piece on engineering. We've produced it. It's great. We need an engineer to review it. In none of those situations that I've just mentioned is the expert review coming from the learning designer. So that's the point we're differing on, because I agree we're going to need human review where it's appropriate for the things that are produced by the machine. But I'm just challenging whether or not that's a learning expertise.
So the learning expertise is about the learning itself. I've checked with you and validated your experience and expertise around your technology subject. But the output using Copilot in this instance, or Claude, whatever it is, okay, based on that is going to be validated by a learning designer, because it's about understanding the audience, the location, the evaluative necessary requirements, return on investment, all those different aspects that go into a whole learning intervention, a whole corporate-wide project, or a single in the flow of work pop-up Socratic learning coaching session. Any of those different modalities, the learning professional will hopefully understand why certain modalities will work better than others, how to discuss and influence the subject matter expert to explain why it would work better why learners would more than likely have a better outcome than this, and it would affect the evaluation results and the return on investment. That's where the expertise comes in. And so the subject matter expert has to validate that stuff, absolutely their stuff. But the learning designer, that's their expertise. So they should be subject matter experts themselves in their subject, in their field. So educational training, whatever it is, and understand, frameworks and models, all of those different things that are involved in working with people and helping to teach and helping them to understand learning. And of course, empathy is massively important. So empathizing, this is one of the things in the time model, is subject matter experts and learning designers empathizing with each other, understanding their point of view, understanding what it is they're really looking for, understanding the pressures that are on them, understanding why they're saying this. Why do they feel it's so important that this is included? And responding to that. But likewise, and conversely, the subject matter expert understanding why a learning designer is saying something and expressing that motivational aspect of this would work better if this was cut, this was put into something else, this was added here, maybe we come back to this later, all those different aspects. So that's the expertise. And this is where I say, and maybe I need to say this more, that learning designers should be subject matter experts themselves. And unfortunately, I have seen a decline in expertise in that sense, which is where the cognitive debt bit comes in. And it was before LLMs, but, it definitely has risen as people believe they can just output stuff, and that's the answer. It's an answer, it's not the answer. And often it just gets things wrong. Now, I mentioned I've written an article about this latest generation, Gen Z and
Gen Z.
Alpha.
Let's talk about Gen Zs.
But there's this podcast series that has got thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads, and this newer generation are listening to this stuff and loving it. But they know that the AI is a fictitious person. They know it's not real. They know it's a made-up person. They know it's been LLM'd, outputted the content. And a lot of it may be wrong. And so when interviewed, the owners of these podcasts said, well, we just take that into account. We just assume that some of it's wrong, but they love it. So they're lapping it up. So there's a paradigm shift there in terms of how this new generation are understanding and interacting and responding to AI. And that speaks back to my thing about trust as well. How are people experiencing, tools, technology over and versus humans? They're more willing to listen, generalization, I'm just speaking specifically about this program and the article I wrote, but they're more willing to listen to fictitious people with AI voices talking about a subject that obviously they don't know anything about and lap it up. Now, that's fine. If they want to do that, that's fine. But that's a decline in expertise, obviously. And there's a big paradigm shift there. So for me, there's more need now for the expert, I think. I think that we need to take that step forward in terms of really working with AI in that sense, but recognizing the expertise is needed and become more of a subject matter expert in learning, the umbrella term. Yeah.
So 2 points on that. First point, If you're watching, you guys have been watching this, who've been following the show. A few podcasts ago, we had Jen Bryan, change leader, who was talking extensively about how the new generation rejects the concept of AI because her daughter rejects the concept of AI. And I offered for her daughter to come on the program, yet to happen, but watch this space. And David has just said the opposite of this based on an article and some research. For me, I know which one I believe. I always go with the article, the research, the data. But if you've got an anecdotal opinion in this day and age, apparently that's as relevant and as true, which is not something I believe. So challenge to the previous podcast viewers and challenge to the previous podcaster. Let's talk that out. It needs to be data driven. And I frankly, this is season 2 of AI Unleashed, not season 1, right? This season, I am much less tolerant of anecdote in the face of evidence. So open challenge to everybody watching this.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we look at the data, as you've rightly mentioned, David.
Yeah.
The other side of that is generationally, or in modern economic times, we have a shift from what used to be called the pedagogy of scarcity to the pedagogy of abundance. And we have choices that we make, and we're talking about the expertise choice, and we're talking about the generational acceptance or rejection or continuance behaviors around different types of tech. And those behaviors are slightly more nuanced, both in the corporate space and in the generational consumer space, because we now have abundance. We now have the ability to, if you think about Notebook LM as a great example, I'm just going to put some papers in there. I'm going to create a podcast, a video, an animated explainer, or there's going to be a couple of slides. There's going to be a mind map at the click of a button. So now our choices are less nuanced because they don't need to be as nuanced because of the abundance of information and presentation modalities. And in the same way, when we talk about it might not be accurate, but it's presented in so many ways that anybody can kind of pick it up. It's accessible now. So how does that impact all the stuff we've been talking about in the design space around, well, we need expertise. We need to be thinking about our choices. We need to be thinking about how we induce behavior from the media that we're creating when we have such abundance at our fingertips.
Well, I think two things there. One is obviously privacy and data. So, these things are more or less free at the point of entry, and you're giving over data. So there's big issues around that. So that's another subject, but it does, it is around trust. And this is my thing, is that trust is, as I say, is the big currency. So the other thing is that it still needs validating. So if you hand over stuff and it writes something for you or designs something for you, you still need to look at it and does it make sense? So in terms of an abundance, and this is where I go back to simple things like, I have Sky Television, right? And on my screen, I have Netflix, I have Disney, I have this, that, and the other. It's, it's complete choice fatigue. I don't know what I'm looking at. It's too much. Some nights I just don't look at anything. My wife just tells me, "I will watch this." Fine. Okay, I'll do that. And I think that abundance of knowledge is where it goes back to that cognitive debt again. It's like, okay, I can't be doing with this. I'll have a ham and cheese toastie and a cup of tea and let that thing do it for me. That'll do. Fine. People aren't understanding what they're doing. They're not, what their output is. They're not aware of what they're saying. They need to reread it, validate it. It needs to come from them. The Society of Authors have, I'm not going off subject here. What I'm saying is that the Society of Authors have brought a new badge in for writers where it will say, this book or this article was written by a human. It's not AI. Now, I think there's two things going on there, actually. This anti-AI thing, I don't think it's useful. I think it's important that the human is involved in it and writes their stuff. I don't really see the problem in, if you have if you've got Grammarly, for goodness sake, installed on your machine, it'll help you just trim it round, okay, to make it more readable. I get, but that's what an editor's for. So when you're publishing a book, you get an editor that looks at your stuff and tells you this would read better if you did this. Okay, let's change this. What are you saying here? Contentious people might not like what I've said. I'm not wed exactly to it. I just think we should embrace all the new tools, and we can still do that and be authentic. We can do both. But I think in this period of absolute knowledge abundance, it's becoming I just think people know less than they think they know. And, there's a famous phrase, the more I study, the less I know. I think it is paraphrased. But the deeper you go, the less you realize you know. And, you end up just going to an ashram and just vegging out because, what was the point of all this study? I don't know anything, So we're in a glut of knowledge and tools to be able to produce knowledge. And I think that it's an interesting time.
I think we're in a glut of information. We're not necessarily, I think we're in a
information.
A drought
Thank you.
of
Yes,
knowledge.
I agree. Yes. Well, it's knowledge that's been gleaned from the internet. This is the thing. And then again, you see, this is where the LLM and trustworthiness comes in, because it would have gleaned all of the stuff that people have said that isn't true and then regurgitated it and told you it's true. So, which is why, again, you need the expert in the room. And we need to be subject matter experts, all of us, ultimately.
And on that bombshell, time has run out. So let's close this. I think if you're watching this, reflect on a bunch of things that have been said. We've talked about expertise. We've talked about different jobs and how they may cluster and how they may become more or less relevant. And we've talked about capability distribution. And all of these things affect you. If you're watching this, they affect you personally. Think about what you might do with that information and think about how you might navigate the ship of your career across the choppy waters of learning tech as we move through the AI revolution. For today, it remains, of course, remains for me to thank you, David. Thank you for being on the show for this hour. If people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
So on LinkedIn would be a great way, really, is the main thing. And also look up me on the Substack, Dr. David Love, Time for Trust. Please click and subscribe. I would appreciate it. And look out for my book as well, Time for Trust, which will be coming and will be a handbook for all of you learning practitioners and leaders in the learning sphere.
Thank you, David. And all links will be in the YouTube thing at the bottom, whatever it's called, the caption. There you go. So if you're watching this, if you're watching us on LinkedIn, go follow the show on YouTube and Spotify. If you're watching it on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell button, all of that stuff. And if you're watching on Spotify, don't forget to follow the channel. You can see reels on Instagram. You can see articles on our respective Substacks, as well as reels on pretty much every platform. So thank you for watching. Thank you for following along. Don't forget to subscribe everywhere, and see you next time.